Mafia 2 is one of those games that I've heard about for years, but unfortunately never got to play. As someone who was a big fan of the first game when it came out what feels like 100 years ago, I was always disappointed by that, and had been looking for a chance to redeem my inner crime film nerd. Back in May, when Hangar 13 released the definitive edition of Mafia 2, I figured it would be the perfect time to dive in and check it out. Unfortunately, it had to wait due to the slate of big releases that dropped around late spring and early summer, but I finally got my hands on it a few weeks ago and couldn't wait to sink my teeth into it. What I got was, well, a surprise, that's for sure, in more ways than one. Okay, so to be upfront with you, this game has a lot of problems. These problems range from mildly irritating to downright awful, if I'm being honest. But under that was a very likable experience with a gem of a story that I completely understand fans being captivated by for all these years. So with that being said, let's get into my thoughts on it.
He's in the black limo.
Hey, Joe, I got eyes too, you know?
There goes one of them.
Nice job.
Clemente's next. Come out of your hole, you fucking rat. It's fucking over. Move it, Vito.
Four of them in that car.
Come on, you drive.
Stupid fucks.
Visually speaking, the game is decent enough. It's clearly an older game with new textures thrown on top of it, so don't go expecting God of War or anything, but it holds up pretty well in this aspect. The fictional town of Empire City is pleasant to look at, if a bit shallow and underwhelming as far as content goes, but that's something I'll save for the gameplay section. The level designs are cool and will certainly check all the right boxes if you're like me and the 1950s noir style setting really does it for you. I loved running around each and every level, from the lavish Empire Arms Hotel, to the dark and dreary Hartman Federal Penitentiary, to the colorful Red Dragon restaurant. All these locations were cool and memorable, if not anything super visually stunning. This game definitely has a clear vision for the atmosphere it was going for, and nailed it to a T. So props to the developers for that. The character models for the main character, Vito, and the important NPCs are solid. Vito has an okay variety of outfits you can pick from, though I'm not a fan of how you lose all these due to story circumstances. Losing your house, money, and guns are bad enough in the situations it happens. The game should have at least let you keep the outfits you spent your money on. Replacing them is cheap though, so I guess that was the justification. The character models for the random citizens are hilariously bare, with only a handful of unique ones that repeat themselves throughout the entire city. Seriously, I'm pretty sure I saw this female character model a good 300 times throughout my 20 hours or so with the game. Again though, this is an older title that is just being retextured, not fully rebuilt from the ground up as is the case with the upcoming Mafia 1 remake. So I was more than willing to forgive the game's lackluster showing in this regard. What I couldn't forgive though was the abysmal performance issues. Mafia 2 consistently struggles with frame rate drops, texture clashes and bug outs, screen tearing, and more. Driving and cutscenes are where these problems are their most egregious and become almost unbearable in some instances. In what is going to become a running theme of this review, Hangar 13 has done nothing to address these despite the game having been out for over 3 months. When you factor in the gameplay bugs that I'm going to get to, it's pretty inexcusable for them to have released the game in this state. On the more pleasant side of things, the soundtrack for this game is glorious. If you're a fan of 40s and 50s rock, jazz, and pop, this will certainly be right up your alley. The silky smooth crooning of Dean Martin and the jazzy melodies of Fats Domino go a long way in not just pulling you into the world, but making you at least willing to put up with a lot of the graphical and gameplay issues. It's a phenomenal soundtrack that is easily up there with one of the best I've heard in a game, and even if you have no interest in ever playing Mafia 2, I'd at least recommend finding it online somewhere and giving it a listen. The sound design is fairly mundane, with a lot of weapons and cars sounding similar to one another, and while given the age of the game itself I am willing to look past this, it is worth mentioning at least once in this video, if not something I'm really going to dwell on. It's forgettable, but not so aggressively bad that it ruins the experience for me. As far as voice acting is concerned, Mafia 2 hits it out of the park, with Vito and his best friend Joe stealing the show with fantastic performances from Rick Pasqualone and Robert Costanzo. Though the supporting cast is certainly no slouches in this regard either. Even the one-off characters we only interact with for a limited time do a great job of telling you lots about their personality with the small amount of dialogue they are given. Overall, the presentation of this game is slightly above average, with solid textures but loads of graphical and performance issues that really should not have been present in a remaster for a 10-year-old game. The beautiful soundtrack and great voice acting, however, bails this aspect out a lot and saves the game's aesthetic from being aggressively mediocre.
What you selling, Mac?
You buying or just window shopping?
Maybe.
We're selling smokes. $2 a carton, $100 a crate.
I'll make you a deal. You fork over 10 cartons and maybe we'll let you and your buddy get out of here in one piece.
Hey, look, pal. How about you get back in your cute little car with your little friends there and I'll pretend I never seen you. Sound good?
You don't get it, do you, you fat motherfucker? This is our turf, and it's gonna cost you to operate here. Now pay up.
You're the one who doesn't get it. You have any idea who you're talking to? One last chance. You walk away now and...
Yeah, I'll tell you who I'm talking to. A fat two-bit fucking dago door-to-door salesman hawking stolen cigarettes on my turf. And it's time to close up shop, asshole. Okay, boys. I think it's time for a fire sale. Shit! Joe! Oh, fuck! What do you say now, Porky?
Who do I gotta say?
That's what I gotta say.
Come on! Hop in that car and let's go!
The story of Mafia 2 has been widely lauded for being one of the best mob stories put in a video game, and there is definitely merit to this. You take control of a young man named Vito who enlists in the military after being caught by the police doing illegal activities with his lovable friend Joe. After a brief tutorial where you fight against the Italian army during the liberation of Sicily in World War II, Vito is given a temporary discharge and sent home when he is wounded in battle. This temporary discharge quickly turns permanent after he reunites with Joe and illegally obtains forged discharge papers. Despite desperate pleas from his family to go straight and get himself a legitimate job, Vito just can't help but find his way back to the criminal lifestyle, which quickly leads to him and Joe working for one of Empire City's crime families. The rest of the game takes place over the course of 6 years or so, with Vito being sent to prison about halfway through due to selling stolen gas rations. The player gets to experience firsthand Vito's rise in the Mafia and subsequent fall as him and Joe end up biting off more than they can chew and inadvertently starting a war between the Italian Mafia and the Empire Bay Triads. It's a rags to riches to rags narrative that is fairly common throughout stories of this genre, and a lot of the common tropes you will find in those type of films are present here. The clean-cut kid who just wants to rescue his family from poverty. The crude but loyal best friend who isn't afraid to mouth off to anyone and always finds himself in trouble. The naive young kid who doesn't belong in this type of world and ends up being killed as a result of dabbling in it. You get my drift. It's not a mold breaker, but as I've talked about before, that really doesn't matter to me if the story is compelling and well executed. The ending is quite powerful, but unfortunately drops a pretty big cliffhanger on you. The good news though is you find out what happened after the fact if you play Mafia 3. The bad news is to find out what happened, you have to play Mafia 3. Anyway, what the story lacks in originality, it more than makes up for with style and flair. If you are someone who is typically a fan of Mafia films like I am, you will be very pleased with what you are served here, and I can totally understand why after all these years the narrative is held in such high regard by the fan base.
You shouldn't be doing this. Vito can handle himself.
Let's go, Vito. We got his back.
From a gameplay perspective, Mafia 2 is certainly a bit dated, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. On its surface, it's the same as many of the cover-based shooters that were extremely popular in the late aughts. The shooting mechanics themselves are a bit janky, but tolerable once you get used to them. The one thing I found a bit annoying was the massive ratio for error present in aiming. I can't even count how many times I was aiming directly at someone's head and the shot was so off it either missed entirely or clipped their shoulder. This is due to the large space inside of your reticle that makes prolonged aiming down the sights more of a headache than it's worth. Instead, what you want to do is take advantage of the aim assist that is built in when you pop out of cover. Popping out of cover will cause you to automatically target an enemy in the chest or head, provided they are at least semi-close to your aiming point. And this jump in, jump out style of shooting is really what you want to go with. Hanging out of cover too long can spell disaster, especially if you are playing on hard, so just hop in and out like a jack-in-the-box and you'll be set. The game uses a checkpoint based saving system that is linked to story progression, which I'm not a huge fan of. This really discourages you from exploring the world as the game is prone to crashing due to its shaky performance, and running around stealing cars to sell for an hour only to have the game crash and you lose all the money you just acquired is quite frustrating, something that happened to me about 3 or 4 times while playing. The shaky performance sadly gets worse here as the game is very susceptible to crashes, enemy AI getting stuck in places you can't reach, forcing you to reload a checkpoint, and most egregious of all, an infinite loading screen bug that can happen at the end of Chapter 14, the longest and most difficult chapter of the game, with your only recourse being to play the chapter over again. There is a reliable way to avoid that, so if you pick up the game I would highly recommend looking that up before you start this chapter, so you can avoid the headache. Sadly, I was not aware of this going into the game, so I got screwed by it. As said before, when you couple this with a save system that doesn't give you the ability to manually save, it really discourages you from doing anything besides plowing through the main story. If that all sounds like a deal breaker to you, don't worry, because even when you do get to explore the world crash free, there really isn't much to do. Stealing cars to sell whole or crush into scrap for money, and robbing stores for money is about it, which is a shame because Empire City is a very interesting world. Other than that, the only real motivation for exploring is to find the obscene amount of wanted posters hung throughout the city. God, I was not looking forward to talking about the collectibles. Mafia 2 has 2 types of collectibles: Playboy magazines, of which there are 50, and wanted posters, of which there are 189. Yes, I didn't stutter, 189. In the original game, there were only 159, but even though Hangar 13 couldn't get the game to run stable, they found the time to add 30 more of these to the definitive edition, which is just... If you want to 100% the game, you will need to find every single one. I used a guide by a YouTuber named 360 Game TV, which I'll link in the description below. Even with that, this is still an unbelievably mind-numbing activity that I can only imagine was thrown in to give you some kind of motivation to look around the city.
Come play with us, Daddy. Forever and ever and ever.
Unless you want 100% the game though, this is something you can completely avoid, as there is literally no gameplay benefit to finding these. The Playboys are a little less annoying to look for due to obvious reasons, and the fact they are located throughout the missions, not just strewn about the city. Also, there is 50, not a fucking 189. So yeah, that helps. The driving mechanics are fine, though the cars seem to handle like they're always skating around on ice, even worse so when they are literally skating on ice. But thankfully this is remedied with a few upgrades to your preferred vehicle. And trust me, you are going to get really defensive about these cars. Okay, it's fine. I caused the accident. Let me just handle this like an adult. So from a gameplay perspective, it's a little janky, and the bugs can make things a bit of a nightmare sometimes, especially during the driving sequences. But it's acceptable and, dare I say, even fun once you get the mechanics down some. So not game breaking, but there is certainly room for improvement even when you consider the time period the original game came out.
So it was you who lent my father the money.
Your father? Ah, like father, like son. I see you don't approve. But I didn't make him borrow the money, now did I? Just like I didn't make you. If you ever need a loan, you know where to find me.
Sure.
Mafia 2 is a game with problems. Lots of problems. But if you can soldier past those, you're in for a really enjoyable experience that I would say you should definitely play if you're really into mob films. If that kind of thing isn't your bag, then you can probably skip it. I can completely understand why the game has gained such a hardcore following in the years since its release. An extremely solid story with phenomenal voice acting, and mechanics that are decent enough given the time period. The open world was cool in concept, but unfortunately it was poorly executed here and never really lived up to its potential. 7 out of 10. I really wanted to give the game an 8 or higher just because the fun factor is there, but this sloppy remaster is just inexcusable. In channel news, I feel like I've been saying something about the Final Fantasy VII Remake for like 10 videos straight now, and just, yeah, I suck. But I have a mildly good reason for the pushback this time. I promise. I really liked this new format I've used on this video and my Ghost of Tsushima review. So I'm planning on sticking with it, as I feel like it makes the reviews more organized and just makes the video overall flow better. The downside to this is every video that was already in mid-production has to be redone to fit this new template. So this pushes back the 2 videos I've had delayed even more. God, I'm bad at this. Anyway, sorry about that, since I know I promised a Last of Us 2 review at the end of my last video, and obviously that isn't what I'm releasing. I think from now on I'm going to stay away from giving any concrete dates on anything, and just release stuff as I get it done. All that being said, I have some cool games I'm excited to cover coming down the pipeline, so I really hope you guys enjoy those. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you guys and gals next time.